All right, friends, we need to pick up where we left off last time. Last time we were actually had wrapped up, or mostly wrapped up, talking about autotrophs, or at least photoautotrophs. Autotrophs, if you'll remember, are organisms that make their own food and then get energy out of that food they make. We spent our time in the last podcast mostly talking about photoautotrophs, which are organisms that use light as the energy source that they use to create their own food molecules. For example, the plants here, the algae here, use photosynthesis to make food. Okay? Now, that is by far and away the most common autotroph, at least as far as we are concerned, up here on the surface of the planet. However, there are other types of autotrophs, okay? There are chemosynthetic autotrophs, autotrophs that don't use photosynthesis, but instead they use energy that they get not from light, but from chemical bonds within small inorganic molecules. They use the energy within these bonds to give them energy to create their own food molecules. So they are not using light to create food molecules. They're using energy from simple inorganic compounds to make their own food. Okay? Some bacteria do this. Generally speaking, they can serve as the base of an entire food web where light is absent. For example, at deep sea vents, these bacteria that can harness food energy chemosynthetically then can serve as kind of like the producers for that food web where light is absent. Okay? Now, heterotrophs are, of course, organisms that must eat food to get food and thus energy from that food. We also call them consumers. Okay? There are many types of consumers, and I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with these terms, but we're going to go ahead and just quickly go over them. So, if you're an herbivore, you, of course, eat plants, so you're eating plants or perhaps algae or something of that nature. You are eating producers, okay? And you are what is called a first level consumer. So if the producers are the base of your food web or your trophic levels, we'll talk about what that means in a minute, but if your producers, your plants, are on the front line, they're the ones that are going to harness this energy of sunlight. Then the first level consumers or primary consumers are going to sit on top of them, so to speak, eating the producers and thus harnessing the energy that the producers captured. And so those are herbivores. They are strictly plant eaters. Now, of course, you can also be a carnivore, perhaps. They are second level consumers, which eat herbivores. So if these are your producers down at the bottom, then your first level consumers are here. Your second level consumers are those that are feeding on the first level of consumers. So obviously you have a carnivore eating an herbivore in this picture. Okay. Now, carnivores can also be at the third level, okay, a tertiary level or third level consumer, in which case they would be a carnivore eating another carnivore, okay? You can even have a fourth level, though normally we don't typically go up much higher than that, okay? And we'll talk about why that is shortly. All right, omnivores, okay? Cute little fellow, eat both plant and animal material. So an omnivore, depending on what he happens to be eating in a given day. So if these are my producers here, I could have an omnivore who is eating plant material and thus be acting as a primary first level consumer, or you could have an omnivore that on a different day is eating a consumer. And so he might be acting as a secondary consumer. Now, detritivores and decomposers. A detritivore is kind of a subcategory of a decomposer, if you will. They're going to be eating dead stuff they find dead, like this black vulture is going to be having a yummy meal off of that dead poor roadkill thing. Or they might eat waste, like this dung beetle can make a meal off of this animal waste, whatever it is, a big bowl of poo, all right? It will consume that. They are, in a way, decomposing. They are not capturing something and killing it. They're helping something get decomposed further, okay? But what they do is they actually eat the material like we eat things, whereas a true decomposer, like a fungus or bacteria, is going to be secreting enzymes directly onto the substance that, like this piece of wood, this tree trunk, and the fungus is going to then slurp up the stuff that gets digested after they've secreted digestive enzymes on it, and they will absorb it. So generally speaking, decomposers are the absorbers. They will first decompose the stuff. They will first or digest it by secreting chemicals onto it, and then they will absorb it, okay? Now, how do all these guys fit together? We've already started addressing some of that. Energy flows in one direction through an ecosystem, okay? Typically, this flow goes from the sun, is harnessed by the autotrophs, and then this energy is passed to the heterotrophs, okay? And those are basic feeding relationships, at least here on the surface, okay? Now, in certain ecosystems, however, like ones that are at deep sea vents based on chemosynthesis, inorganic chemicals being spewed out from the earth would take the place of the sun. They are the energy source, harnessed by chemoautotrophs like chemoautotrophic bacteria, chemosynthesizers would be essentially saying chemoautotrophs, and then heterotrophs would eat those guys. So that would be the energy flow in this. So really, the only thing that really is fundamentally different is the origin of the initial energy. Okay? Now, you all know that a food chain is just a series of steps in which one organism gets eaten by another, and because we're eating one organism, we're going to pass the energy that was contained in that organism onto the one that eats it. So, if this is a plant, this is a producer, this caterpillar will eat the leaves of the plant and it will get energy. The frog eats the caterpillar. The energy contained in that caterpillar now belongs to the frog. The snake eats the frog. The energy locked up in the tissues of the frog now belongs to the snake, and so on. Okay? So a series of steps in which organisms transfer energy by eating and, sadly, by being eaten. Now, a food web. So a food chain is exactly that. It is a chain. Here's a link, here's the next link, here's the next link, here's the next link. It's one line. A food web, however, is a bunch of food chains basically all connected, a network. We're not just talking about one chain, we're talking about how all the life in this deciduous forest out here would interact and feed off of each other and so on. So the network of complex interactions made when the feeding relationships of all the organisms in an ecosystem, all of them are linked together. Okay, so we're going to link all the food chains in the ecosystem together somehow. Okay, so in this case, this is a pretty decent food web. A food chain would be going from producer to rabbit to fox, but in reality, the fox doesn't have to just depend on the rabbit. It could also eat a squirrel or a mouse or whatever. And so we have many things that could go to the fox and so on. Okay? As you can see, it's much more complex. All right? Now, Because it is more complex, food webs are also more stable than food chains, okay? So, if one season something happens to the rabbit population, that means the fox doesn't necessarily have to just starve. He might be able to eat squirrels, he might be able to eat mice, and then when the rabbit population rebounds, the foxes will still be around, it'll be okay. But if the rabbit population never does rebound, then the fox population might put too much pressure on the squirrels and so on. So that's why it's really important that we keep as many organisms as possible in a food web. If you have just a food chain, here to here, we eliminate the rabbits, the foxes are going to die. If we have a nice food web, the fox has something else it can depend on, hopefully waiting for the rabbit population to rebound, okay? Food webs thus are more stable than just a food chain, okay? Now, trophic levels. Trophic levels are steps in a food chain. That's how you kind of need to think of them. So at the base, you would have the producers. At the next level, the herbivores, and so on. Okay, so the first level we have producers. The second, third, and higher levels are going to be consumers. So the first trophic level is the producers. Second, third, and higher would all be consumers. Okay, now what we want to get to is how much energy is in each trophic level. And what we find when we talk about that is that trophic levels are best illustrated as what are called ecological pyramids. And actually, it would be ecological triangles because that's how we always draw them. At the base, you have your producers who are harvesting energy from the sun. And there's the greatest number of producers. There's lots and lots of blades of grass, lots and lots of trees out there, and so on. And those producers can support a whole lot of primary or first level consumers, but they can't support as many consumers as there are producers because the amount of energy in each trophic level decreases as you go up, okay? So an ecological pyramid is showing that, and I didn't quite phrase that perfectly. I will get it right in a minute. But an ecological pyramid is showing that the relative amount of energy or matter contained in each trophic level in a food chain gets less as you move up that food chain, okay? Now, there are three types of ecological pyramids. There is a pyramid of energy, a pyramid of biomass, and a pyramid of numbers. And we're going to quickly address what each of those demonstrates, okay? All basically showing the same thing, just in slightly different ways. A pyramid of energy literally shows the amount of energy available in each trophic level. A calorie, as you will learn when you get to chemistry, a calorie is a measure of energy. And as you can see, this pyramid is saying that there's 6,000 kilocalories per square meter per year among the plants, okay, in this particular ecosystem, okay? But if you look up here, there are only 600 kilocalories per square meter per year available within the bodies of all these herbivores. So you can see that the amount of energy available in each trophic level is less and less and less, okay? Indeed, this is an important number, okay? Less than 10%, all of the plants down here, all the producers, will pass on to the consumers that eat them in this first level consumer category, will pass on only 10% of the energy that they have been exposed to, okay? And these guys will only pass on 10% of the energy they got from here to this level. And these guys will only pass on 10% to the next level, okay? What we need to think about is why. Why? The reason is that when Mr. Mouse here, okay, eats grass or seeds or whatever mice eat, when he eats that, he is going to use up the vast majority of that energy that was in that grass fueling his own life activities. He needs to grow. He needs to make babies. He needs to run around. He needs to evade predators. He needs to do all kinds of things, and it requires energy. So he's going to just use up most of that energy. He's going to poop out a little bit of it and waste some of it as heat. So some of the energy just gets wasted. He's going to use a ton of it, and then all that is left to pass on to whatever eats him, perhaps this owl here, is what is actually still trapped within his own body tissues, making up his own cells. And that is only about 10% of the energy that he ever obtained. Okay? So not very much energy gets passed from one trophic level to the next. Less than 10% actually gets passed. Thus, you can't support near as many organisms at the top as you could at the bottom. That's an important concept to remember. It takes a whole lot, and here we can see our little arrows going up. It takes a whole lot of production to make one big old bear, okay? All right, another look at a pyramid of energy. You can see if you start out a joule, a J is for the term joule, which is kind of like a calorie. It's just a unit of energy, so don't let that throw you. If you've got 1,000,000 units of energy of sunlight, these producers are going to trap 10,000 joules of it. These guys are only going to get 1,000 of that. These guys are going to get 100 of that. These guys are only going to get 10 of that. So you've got to have an awful lot of production going on, a whole lot of plants to support even one snake, even though the snake's not directly eating the plants at all. Okay? Now, a pyramid of oh, wait a minute. My bad. No, that's right. Okay. A pyramid of biomass is simply the same concept, but instead of measuring actual energy contained in the organisms, you are just measuring their mass, okay? So it shows the total amount of living tissue within a trophic level. So in terms of grams per meter square here, there's 10,000 grams per square meter of producers that you get. All of the plants together, you mass them. That's how much biomass. All the grasshoppers together, and you mass them. All the frogs together, you mass them, the secondary consumers. So you're just massing, and what we find is that the mass scales out pretty much to the same ratio as the literal energy does, okay? It decreases as you go up the food chain in about the same amounts, okay? Okay, reflects the amount of potential energy that's available. Grams is the unit because you're measuring mass, okay? Now, a pyramid of numbers, again, very similar concept, but this time you're actually just counting individuals. So you get to go out in the field and count every individual grass plant that you have per unit area. Then you're going to count all the mice, and you're going to count all the hawks. And what you find, once again, is that you can support much less at the top than you can at the bottom. So based on actual numbers in each level, and sometimes it's not shaped like a pyramid, just so you know. Like, for example, if you have a tree, okay, one tree is only one producer, but it might be able to support, 2,000 insects and 20 birds. So in this case, you'd only have one producer, but it could support, because it's such a big producer, it could support a bunch of insects and then, a few birds or whatever. Okay. So just be aware of that. That's not a big deal. Generally speaking, you need to get that pyramids start big at the bottom and get smaller at the top. Okay? All right. Let me see. I think we can... Yeah. All right. We'll stop there because now we need to start talking about how matter is different from energy. Energy flows through in one direction, and there's less and less of it available as you get up a food chain. Matter works a little differently. We'll talk about that in the next podcast. All right. That's it. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next podcast.